Good morning, Oklahoma, and welcome to the Middle Ground. I'm your host, Michael Carnuccio. Well, lack of interest, voter fatigue, whatever you want to call it, we're seeing more and more every election day where voters just aren't getting out to vote. So what does that mean? Well, joining us now is David Blatt, the CEO and Executive Director of the Oklahoma Policy Institute. David, thank you so much for being here. I saw some numbers that basically said this past election, I think it was that we had 30% of eligible voters in Oklahoma that were actually participating. What does this mean? I mean, are we at a low point for our state?
We really are. 30% was the lowest voter turnout we've had probably in Oklahoma history. And to some extent, that's part of a national trend. The midterm elections this year saw low voter turnout most every place. But Oklahoma, this trend of declining voter participation is particularly severe. So in the last presidential election, we were among the lowest states. What's interesting is that it hasn't always been this way. Back in 1992, the turnout for the presidential election was 70%. We were actually among the top third of states. So it's really been in the last several election cycles that voter participation in Oklahoma has not only fallen along with the nation as a whole, but really much more steeply.
So we also saw another interesting dynamic this year. There's, of course, 101 members of the State House of Representatives, and I think 65% of those races were determined either on filing day in April by no one else running against a particular candidate or in the primary system. So, I mean, you've got the vast majority didn't even make it to the general election. Do you think this is part of why voters are becoming apathetic?
I think it plays a part. So as you said, you know, we had uncontested elections in almost 2/3 of the seats in the House and half the seats in the Senate. And I think that, you know, when you don't even have two parties or two candidates up in the general election, voters have no reason to pay attention or turn out, and I think it just makes them even more cynical that, you know, their voice doesn't make a difference if they don't even have a candidate to vote for.
So one of the things we talk about here on the Middle Ground is how do we compare at the local level, state level, or whatever, nationally. So how is Oklahoma's numbers comparing? I think, if I understood, are we third worst in the country, basically?
So the Pew Research Trust did a study, which they've updated a couple times, and in 2012, Oklahoma's turnout for the presidential election was just a tad over 50%. And we were the third lowest in the country. That's continuing a trend in recent elections. Pew actually created an electoral performance index where they looked at a whole series of measures, including voter registration and turnout and ways to facilitate voting. Oklahoma ranked 47th on there. So I think that gives us an idea that while some of the things that are keeping people from the polls are really nationwide, there's some things that we could really focus on and try to improve Oklahoma's performance.
Well, let's talk right there. What are some, maybe the phrase low-hanging fruit policy solutions? What could be done to maybe open the doors for more voter participation?
There's a number of things. So we put out a big issue brief in the fall, which your viewers can find on our website at okpolicy.org. I'll make a quick plug. And we're encouraged to see that there has been legislation introduced. Senator Holt, who's going to be another guest on your show, has introduced a package of election reform measures, some of which would bring about some pretty significant changes in our electoral system. And some of them I think would be under the low-hanging fruit category. So one of the things that in an increasing number of states we have online voter registration. Saves people from having to go out in person. We do so much online nowadays. People are used to it. It actually reduces the margin for error if you don't have paper that can get lost or you know, handwriting that gets confused.
Sure.
So moving to an online voter registration system is one. Expanding early voting to more hours and more days. Extending the registration period so that voters can vote either during the early registration period. Some states do same-day registration. So there's a number of things that if you have a voter, now even if voters are interested, sometimes it's past the registration day or they have so many problems getting to the polls, there's a lot that we could do.
I have to ask you, we have about a minute left, and as I understand it, only 60-some% of Oklahomans that are eligible have registered in general, whether they vote or not. I have to ask the question, do candidates play a role in this? I mean, in 2012, was it that it was Mitt Romney and Barack Obama and Oklahoma just didn't respond, or do you really think that, I mean, it's the ability to participate that's being blocked?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think certainly there is apathy. I think the fact that Oklahoma has become more of a one-party state, it was traditionally a one-party Democratic state, has become more of a one-party Republican state. When you have less competition, less people will come out. But I think there are many people who, if you made it easier and did some things to facilitate it, would get out there, would cast a ballot. I think that would be good for our democracy. It's a bedrock principle that voters get to choose their elected representatives. It's a major form of accountability in our system and part of what makes us a functioning democracy. And we really need to work hard to repair the broken democracy in Oklahoma.
Well, this is definitely an issue that we agree on, and really appreciate your time today and coming and sharing that. And we'll see what the legislature can do this year.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for being here. Well, moms and dads, practice what you preach. Or is it do as I say and not as I do? Well, it's a real problem when it comes to practicing your civic duty, and Senator David Holt will join us in studio next to talk about all of this and what can be done. Stay tuned.